will probably be during dessert. So please, if dessert comes, feel free to eat. I'm Jen. Like Paul had mentioned, I work out of Ampersand's Detroit office, so I know automotive. It's very near and dear to my heart and my career. So I'm a little out-of-body experience with all of you that don't cover auto or maybe don't know it as well as I do. So I'm going to try to ask Brian some questions here and help try to relate what we're doing and what he's specifically doing in auto to how it relates to all of your worlds. So with that, Brian Costello here, performance-driven marketing and head of digital services demand generation at General Motors. What the hell does that mean?
You probably know more about auto than me, by the way. So within GM, there's a group called Performance Driven Marketing. It's been around for a while, but it was refactored about a year and a half ago. And part of the refactoring was understanding that in such a large enterprise, how do you create a modern marketing machine built around data? And we really came up with 5 pillars. And we have heads of or directors of each group within the performance-driven marketing. So there's a group that's just data and privacy. And that's really the hub, right? So the idea that if the customer is first and privacy is important, how do we wrap everything we do around that customer and the privacy that customer needs so we can build trust? We then get into insights. How do we actually glean the insights that matter to drive the business results? Because there's a lot of data. We then look at our MarTech stack. So there's a group that just is really kind of refactoring how we understand MarTech within the large organization. As you can imagine, there's a lot of people that put a lot of things on a lot of sites. That's got to end, right? We have a measurement group, which is really advanced measurement, MMM, MTA, really understanding how to use measurement to drive media budget. And then we have my group, which is demand generation. And demand generation for me is I'm focusing on the non-brands. So everything not sexy at GM is what I'm focusing on. Not Cadillac, not Buick, GMC, and Chevy, but all the other businesses we own. So OnStar, our e-com business, our GM Energy business that's burgeoning, our fleet business, all of our B2B. So all of that is really me trying to teach them about demand generation and performance.
Yeah, let's dive into that more. Why would you be teaching them? Tell us about your background. I found it fascinating. You have auto experience through dealer advertising, tier 3. You were at Staples for many years. You've been a lot of places. So why bring you in besides you being amazing? Why bring you in to do this performance demand generation side of the house?
Yeah, I mean, GM has brilliant marketers, to be quite frank. I think I'm incredible. I've been there for 6 months. I'm incredibly impressed with the folks that GM has. GM's also a brand advertiser, generally speaking, right? So when you have folks that are within GM, the company's great at promoting from within and keeping people in the organization. I've been there 6 months, and so equivalent, that's about 32 seconds. The people I meet there, it's sort of like, I've been there 40 years, and I'm like, you're 50. You know, that can't be possible. But it's sort of like they're brand marketers. And so we suddenly have all these performance businesses, and we have brand marketers that were thinking, well, let's just continue how we learned it at the brands, the divisional brands. And so really it's just a matter of understanding that these other businesses require a performance muscle, right? And to build that performance muscle, it's just let's go outside and find people that can do that, because we really didn't have that internally. Similarly, in the PDM group, we really trying to bring in that experts from out of town kind of mentality, right? Which is the other directors on the PDM team, a person from Mondelez, a person from Walmart, from Apple Computer, right? It's bringing in folks that have an outside view to kind of think about what does this machine look like that can drive GM into that next generation.
Yeah, it's from somebody who's born and raised in Detroit, we tend to cycle through the talent. So if you've worked at Ford, you've worked at GM, you work at Stellantis, Chrysler, you kind of all rotate. Well, with COVID, GM has really embraced remote working, and so they've been able to bring in a lot more folks like Brian and people on his team that have different experience that has helped changing the way General Motors, as well as the auto industry in Detroit specifically, are changing and bringing new ideas, and it's not just the same people moving around town at different OEMs. So as you're part of this group, how do you move the brands that you've had before, OnStar has been typically branding focused, or the brands you're responsible for. How do you move your internal clients from brand marketing down to performance, and how are you trying to move up and down that funnel and teach them different things that, again, because a lot of them don't know all of this the way that you do?
Yeah, I don't think it's down to performance. I think it's really understanding. There's a good example. When I started saying performance marketing, performance media, I did get a lot of folks saying, well, no, we're a brand, we do branding. And I had to explain, when I say performance, what I mean is measuring the business, measuring media, measuring your marketing to the business result, whether it's television or it's paid search, right? And so when I think about it, it still goes back to, OnStar is a great example. It's a brand advertiser primarily, but it's a subscription business, right? So ultimately, the question is, how many subscriptions do we want to drive this year? What is our revenue goal? What is our profit goal? We still have to understand that OnStar drives a lot of brand equity through the GM brands. And so it does drive people. There are people who will say, I won't buy a car unless it has OnStar, right? So we have to keep them engaged on that side. And so the brand is really important, but ultimately you want to take brand health metrics, maybe brand affinity, whatever it happens to be, but then level it down to what am I doing within my channels that I can measure so that I can say, incrementally, I drove this many more subscriptions. Because the big challenge in a brand marketer is, I never have enough money to spend, right? Well, if you're a performance business, there's a trick. You can prove that your money works. And if you can prove your money works, the CFO is very open to giving you more dollars. OnStar is a very profitable business. So that's one way you can do it, right? And so just thinking about how to change mindsets to say, I drove X, which was a business result, is better than I drove brand affinity. Still want to drive brand affinity. They love me. But I also drove, $1 billion in profit. That actually perks up ears.
Yeah, and how we talked about this in our prep. The agency has been typically doing a lot of the branding, the brand affinity. What steps have you had to educate them on this, right? You said like the cost per leads or getting more for the CFO, but how have you had to work with the agency to help shift their mindset?
Yeah, we have the benefit of working with a very large global agency. Dentsu Cara is the agency of record. And so we have a lot of resources within the agency family to basically say, look, as we think about these metrics and as we think about measuring to the brand result, how do we get those people involved in the account and make sure that they're actually helping drive? Because the people on the business are great. They know what they're doing. They know these business. A lot of these folks have got some legacy. So they know the business. It's just a matter of shifting a mindset slightly to say, when we think about these mid and lower funnel channels, are we measuring them so that we can show that brand result, a profit, whatever it happens to be, leads in the B2B business, and also continue on, even at our upper funnel, are we using our MMMs in the correct way? So on the PDM side, we lean heavily into modeling, right? So what upper funnel works and what upper funnel doesn't work, right? It's great to say somebody has, again, a great view of your brand, but what creative worked, right? I want to get down to, we're really looking at that level of sophistication to say, which television ads worked better, right? If something can drive more incrementality for the business, it's just better for the business. And so with the agency folks, it's just bringing them along for the ride. And I would say we're lucky enough to have folks that really lean in.
Yeah, that's great. You need that when you're rebuilding and trying to shift perspective of what they've done in the past, right? So more of a personal opinion, do you think like the click-through rate is dead? Do you think some of the traditional ways we've measured things, they've evolved? How do you, as you say, you're measuring cost pers, are those traditional metrics used in those analyses that you're doing? You look at all of it, or are you looking at one specific metric?
Yeah, I can't remember. Somebody on a panel yesterday, I think, hit the nail on the head. I apologize for not remembering who said it, but I think there's a lot of data that we get, right? But the most important thing is, how do we show the right data to the right people to make them give them the opportunity to make change or change something for the better. So we've developed within the PDM group, my colleague Miles Drayton has developed a CMO dashboard for all the CMOs in GM, right? And it really is defining those key metrics that matter. But previous to that, you got these giant decks, to your point, right? Nobody reads them. And we have, I forgot the number, but GM has tens of thousands of dashboards floating around, right? And so it's really rebuilding those dashboards to the things that matter. A CMO wants to see top-line results. They want to see, is it working, is it not working? How do we measure that, and how do we get there? So to the point, I'm not avoiding the call. Is the click-through rate important? I guess. But what's more important is a business result, and how do I show that to senior leadership?
Yeah.
Right? I don't think anybody cares whether, like view-through rate or, a CMO doesn't care.
Right, exactly. They're caring about the bigger picture of things. I like that dashboard. So, at Staples, you ran the retail media network. Let's tell some of our folks in the room, how are auto companies, we don't have to talk GM specifically, you and I had this conversation, how are auto companies thinking about using their data and potentially selling it to other places like Home Depot, Kroger, grocery? We've talked at length about this topic. Why don't we share a little with the group about how auto in general is looking at potentially being a data provider to target media, potentially.
Yeah, and I'll start with saying this is my personal opinion.
Mine too.
Yeah, when I was at Staples, I built the retail media network for them, and I participated in early retail media networks before Walmart Connect was Walmart Connect and Rondell was Rondell, when I worked for Shark Ninja, manufacturer of Shark vacuums, Ninja blenders, things like that. That's an obvious way to make money for a retailer, right? I have the data, you as the manufacturer don't. Therefore, I can make a lot of money off of you, right? With auto, it's a little bit different because the data we get is generally going to be telematics type data, right? I probably can, I know what you're listening to on the radio, I know where you're driving around, right? One, make sure we have to have the consent from the consumer to actually use that data, or anonymize it in such a way that there's no shot in hell that you could actually have any kind of connection. But two, really understanding, and this is something I'm working on, is that interesting to anybody? I can tell you that at Staples on the retail side, one of the big metrics for the stores was store visits, right? They did a lot of terrestrial radio. They did a decent amount of out of home. That kind of makes sense, right? They visited a Staples, or they visited maybe a plaza with a Staples, right? But how much would I be willing to pay for that, right? So I think part of it is, what is that business model for the auto data that would be interesting to who? And I don't think we've worked that out yet. I think, could it be, for instance, a measurement piece, what I just brought up? I would imagine that retailers would be interested in, especially that advertise in out of home and radio and so on. Think about how Sirius XM is sort of just a national buy. I would really be interested in that, but how much am I willing to pay for that? Is that a Nielsen that partners with you and gets that data and just resells it? I don't know the answer, but I think that to have a quote unquote retail media network or auto media network, the data itself has to be super interesting to somebody to buy it. Right, and at our size, Ford, GM, Stellantis, it has to be big enough. Right. Right.
I think they're all trying to figure out that right now. Like, what's the next phase? As we're going to talk about in a second, supply. I've been telling folks last night and today that I work in automotive, and first question is, what's going on with the supply? When can I get a car? I ordered one 6 months ago. I still don't have it. Our world, from a supply chain perspective, the autos is changing it's completely evolved. And I won't bore you with all the way cars are bought and sold with dealers and all the things, but our world has completely evolved. And so the dealerships they're more profitable now than they've ever been. And so the OEM the manufacturer's got to figure out another way to help make money. And so I think that they're all looking at this data in some capacity, the foreign ones as well. So I think it's going to be an interesting evolution over the next couple of years to see what they all do on this front. So back to GM and the supply chain issues, and I'm sure people will ask you, working at GM, when are you going to get your car? What about EV, right? Like you're performance driven. I understand that you're not in the brand, but you get to represent all of General Motors today. Let's talk a little bit about EV strategy that you're aware of, especially someone was asking about Cadillac compared to Tesla, which I've spoke to some of your colleagues about at length. I think that, anything you want to share on the EV side of the house, especially as it relates to measurement too, like that is a big thing. We have to teach people in the auto industry what EV actually is and means. And there's a responsibility of all automakers to educate on EV. So why don't you share your opinion? So I asked two questions, I suppose, there. One about EV and two about like measurement and brand health awareness.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that interested me about General Motors was this big mission, right? The idea of zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion. It won't happen in my lifetime, but it's a really, but I love that, right? I love that. That's a big thing to say. And I would say from leadership down, they really want to get there, right? It's really cool. And so when I think about, some of the things we're doing on the more boring kind of PDM side of EV, it really is understanding where is the next opportunity to grow EV, right? And so a lot of the challenge on the data side is understanding, okay, we know the coasts generally are embracing and buying EVs, but as infrastructure starts to grow, it's really predicting where's the next place, right? Where's the next place you can actually start selling those cars and having the infrastructure that makes people feel confident about buying those vehicles, right? Because obviously the challenge is infrastructure, not so much the vehicles. With GM investing billions of dollars in infrastructure, billions of dollars in battery plants in the United States, I mean, that's all things that are on the top of mind every day. So I think the challenge is not only you have to understand and predict who's investing in infrastructure where. You have to understand, are we investing in infrastructure where, and who's next in line? I think of it as my own town. I live in this small town, and they're kind of putting fiber finally in. And for whatever reason, my neighborhood's like in the middle of nowhere, so it's the last one, right? And I'm just sitting there waiting. But it's like that, right? You may want an EV. You may really, really want one, but you don't live in a place where it just makes sense for you right now to have one. That's the challenge, I think, in the industry as a whole. It's like there's a lot of interest. If you look at the customer and consumer desire, the desire is there. I think GM's investment in lower price, if you think about the Equinox that's coming out, it's like a low $30,000 car, right? An EV, and it's really stunning. But, that's for everybody. Right, it's no longer the $100,000 EV, and so that as that trickles down, you still have to give the confidence to the consumer that they can actually do something with it.
Yeah, the EV products that General Motors is pre-selling are selling out in minutes. So
minutes, yeah. I mean, there's a big wait list for the EV Hummer. There's the Lyric, obviously, and that is a stunning vehicle. And just technologically advanced, and it's a matter of getting them in people's hands. And then you've got the supply chain, and you have to build the car, and it's a challenge.
What else? Anything else that comes to your mind as you're thinking about the future and how you're going to be successful in this role? What else? Anything else?
Yeah, I think the key part is, there's a bit of winning hearts and minds in an organization of this size, and it's really, I can't even remember the acronym, but it's like using sugar instead of a hammer. But I think it's a matter of showing folks that we're on your side. We want to help you grow. And I think with the performance-driven marketing group, it really is what we're seeing is really the brands from, the divisional brands on down saying, thank you for this information. Thank you for leaning in. This is the thing we need. We need more data to prove out the models. We need to show that we're driving business results. We need marketers that understand how to drive those business results, and we need media partners that can actually show you the data and make change, testing and learning and so on. A lot of this is relatively new to auto manufacturers, to folks in the room that are were former retail or it's sort of duh. But when you're spending billions on brand all the time and it works, but then you start saying, well, how well did it work? why did it work? Where did it work? That's when I think that's what I think what we're doing, and that's what makes it fun and exciting.
Yeah, and the interesting thing your team is doing is centralizing it, right? Even though you're not on the huge divisions, if you will, you're on these brands where it's centralized. So for partners like Ampersand and other partners, we now have more centralized help. A lot of us in this room provide data to automakers and other clients, and it kind of goes somewhere at times in a black hole. I feel like now you are being more accessible with centralizing some of those media results, and how we can all work better as partners of yours to continue to move the needle and sell services or cars in some cases. I think that's all I have. Do you want to open it up for questions? We have, there's quite a few. You want to?
As I know, we are hiring. If you know people, feel free to just reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Did anybody else notice that when Jen was introducing herself, she used a Journey lyric? The whole born and raised in Detroit? I did.
It's South Detroit, which does not exist.
I know it doesn't, but it sounded just like it to me.
Needs some Detroit geography.
All right. I'm coming in. I'm going to go this way and then come back. Excuse me. How you doing?
Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time. Brian, this is to you. Good to see you up there. We've been playing a little back and forth lately, but I had a couple of quick questions for you. In regards to, you not necessarily creating a media network, right? But what it sounds to me is though you're taking a foothold and wrapping your arms around what most would call a center of excellence, which I think is brilliant. I think most companies and a lot of Fortune 500 companies now are engaging into that whole concept. Makes it easier for salespeople, but it also makes it, streamlined and efficient for the brands, certainly when you have multiple major Fortune 500 brands across the umbrella. That being said, how important is it to you in focusing into 23 around programmatic?
I mean, I think obviously GM as a whole and all the brands are pretty big spenders in programmatic. I think the key part is understanding how to build the right segments and audiences to talk to the right people at the right time, which is what programmatic is, right? We obviously have a very large first-party data, database, and so the questions I ask are, okay, we have this, but how do we target in a way that gives us, especially in these non-divisional brands, propensity, right? So I want to understand how can I activate against audiences programmatically that have a propensity to buy an OnStar subscription rather than don't. Like this is just making it up. We may find out Cadillac owners almost always buy OnStar. We don't really need to advertise to them. We've got CRM and so on, but Chevy Silverado folks need that push, right? So I think it's really it's vital. We are a big spender. I would argue the thing we need to do is again get back to what is it doing for us and how can we prove it out. If you look at MMMs, generally speaking, programmatic display always actually does pretty well. But why? How do we lean into it? What I want to know is how do we measure it against what else we're spending in the marketplace? So if I'm spending a lot on linear and I'm spending a little on programmatic display, maybe a little bit more on retargeting, I want to break that out even to creative level understanding of what's working and what's not. So because of the data around it, I think it's vital. And I don't think you'd see anybody pulling back on that.
Kind of jumping off of that question, understanding the world of cookieless is coming, whether it's not today, it's not tomorrow, but it's looking like it's going to be 24. What is General Motors' strategy to make sure that from a performance side of things, you are understanding where your dollars are actually being spent?
Yeah, I'll start that off by saying part of the reason PDM was really refactored and rebuilt was specifically around privacy regulation, right? You can imagine there's a lot of databases floating around GM, especially globally, right? And when you have too many people managing too many databases of first-party data, there's too much opportunity for getting into legal problems, right? So by centralizing that organization as best as we can and understanding how to get consent from folks. For instance, if you've consented in Cadillac, have you consented in Buick? It's GM. Well, probably not, though, right? I mean, you didn't say you wanted anything from Buick, right? And so I think the first part is understanding our own data, and then we have to bring in what can we do in the cookieless world when it comes. And I know I'm pretty new to the organization, but I know there's been a lot of working groups working on that for a long time. I can tell you that from when I was at Staples, that was something we were testing early on. And who said it earlier today? Johnson, J&J, I think, bringing up the fact that I welcome it. I hope it comes faster, because I think the key part is, this is a long answer, I guess. The worry I have is the worry I had at Staples, which is you get rid of cookies and there's a lot of vendors and a lot of tech companies that just build the thing that's not cookies but is cookies, right? We're not doing that. I don't want to participate in that, and I think GM is probably the same way, right? At least at Staples, I said, no, we need the new thing and we need the new solution. And whatever that is, whether it's cohorts or whatever it is, it's signals from devices. We just have to figure that out. Is it contextual? Is super hot again? We just have to figure that out. I